All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming out. It's a good turnout here. So my presentation today, I tried to hone the topic into, do we need BAs with Agile? And this is a question that I get all over the place, and it's common around the BA practice as a whole. All BAs get this, and I hear companies, especially clients we're looking at when we're looking at placing projects. You know, well, do we need BAs with Agile projects? Is that even a thing? I thought we got rid of BAs when we went to Agile. Doesn't the development team, don't the developers just get together and they figure it out? I wanted to focus this presentation on talking about what BAs bring to the table on an Agile software project. And the answer to this is yes, we do still need BAs in Agile. So for our presentation today, I'm going to talk about some basics, just talk about, what is a BA? I'll do a little bit of, read a couple of definitions and do a little bit of, book reading here, and do the real terminology and explanations of what a BA is as a whole. And most of this comes from the IIBA, which is the International Institute of Business Analysis. They're really the industry leader in everything going on with the field of BAs. They have a website, IIBA.org. If you need any information on BAs, they have more information than you could possibly digest on that website. So including, wikis, and they do webinars, and they have knowledge bases, articles, links, certifications, books, all sorts of things. So if you are not really familiar with BAs and what BAs bring to the table, go to IIBA.org. I don't get paid for plugging that. I just am really involved with them, and they are really good. So I'll talk about some basics of what a BA is and what a BA does in general. And then I'll really get into the core of the skills of an Agile BA, of a BA on Agile projects, and really get into some key things that a BA brings to the table for Agile software development. And some of those are continuously evolving clarity, holding the context in a consistent manner, building trusted teams, engaging documentation needs. Yes, documentation is still needed for Agile. The BA role is gauging the amount of documentation needed and helping to make sure that that's streamlined. Then I'll talk about STG BAs, so the BAs that we hire here at STG and what those BAs can do for our clients. And then I will open it up to Q&A. If you have questions, we can talk through them, summary, and we'll be done. And then you'll be out of here and back to the rest of your day. All right, Chick did a quick introduction, so I won't go over this too much. I was homeschooled and started software coding when I was 8 years old. I was always interested in it. My dad was an engineer, mostly self-taught. My dad taught me some stuff, and then I just started reading books and all sorts of things. Went to the actual library, checked those out in the 80s, and so started coding very early. My parents put me in high school and public school because I needed to be socialized, because I was just staying in the basement coding on our little TI computer in the dark, and they're like, you need to go be around people. Believe it or not, I had no social skills at that point. So, and so when I was 14, my parents pushed me to get a job. Didn't have a whole lot of money, so anyway, that's a whole other story. So I got a job as an intern for a graphic design company. And they taught me how to use the drafting tools on their little IBM machines, and how to do graphic design and the nuances of it. And I learned from this amazing graphic artist. So I did that all through high school. When I turned 18, I got a job doing tech support for Packard Bell NEC, back when that was a thing. And I helped manage the Air Force accounts. Then I moved into system administration and database admin work, and did my MCSE and my MCDBA, my Microsoft Certified Database Admin and Microsoft Certified Systems Engineering certifications for 2 years, and worked in that for a while. And then I made the switch into software in '99. I got a job with a small software startup here in Salt Lake, and they hired me as a report writer, DBA, and then quickly switched me over into the software team when they realized the skill sets that I had. So from there I went to college, got my bachelor's in business management since I already had so much technical background. Also that company trained me how to be a BA. They started teaching me about BA work. So from 99 to 2002, I started really learning about what a BA is. So then I went back to school and got my degree in business management to balance out that technology and the business side. The key function of a business analyst is being that liaison between the business and technology and really understanding both very well. So that business management degree really helped me balance out those skills. From there, I went to San Francisco for a while, came back, worked for many software companies, did freelance work for years, and then, as Chick mentioned, I hired on with STG 10 years ago. I am the BA practice lead, so I manage all the business analysts for STG, interview all incoming BAs, and help with career development plans for the BAs here at our company. Worked with many clients and on committees. So anyway, that's me in a nutshell. So let's talk about what a business analyst is. So according to the IIBA Business Analysis Book of Knowledge, the BABOK, business analysts working on agile initiatives continually reassess, adapt, and adjust their efforts and tactics. Business analysts conduct analysis and deliver work products at the last responsible moment to continually allow flexibility for change. Detailed analysis work is not done ahead of time, but just in time to be effectively utilized by the agile team. So really, as I was mentioning, so that this is talking about really what a BA is, the definition. So, but really the BA is ultimately the liaison between the business and the development teams. They're required for they work closely with the client management to understand business needs, translate them into actionable items for development to work on, and provide clear requirements to reduce ambiguity and streamline the development process. Again, I swear I'm just going to get through all of this definition book stuff here, but it's important to know the real definitions of what a BA is. These are the textbook, items, but these are key things that a BA is responsible for, and a lot of people don't understand that. There do tend to be a lot of misconceptions on the difference between a BA and a project manager, for example, or what does a BA bring to the table that's different from other people on the software team. These are some of those key things that a business analyst does. There is a difference. I almost made this whole presentation about the difference between a BA and a PM, but I shifted that back on my plate, and that will be that's a whole other can of worms to open and to talk about. But if you're ever curious about the difference between a PM and BA, let me know, and I will be happy to share that with you. Those here at STG know that that's my soapbox. Oh, really? You didn't realize that, huh? Okay. Why are BAs needed? So business analysis includes the understanding of organizational goals, how those goals are connected to specific objectives, determining the course of action that an organization has to undertake to achieve those goals and objectives, and defining how the various organizational units and stakeholders within and outside of that organization interact. So business analysis is performed to define and validate solutions that meet business needs, goals, or objectives. So, who does a BA interact with? Really, this is kind of a loaded question because a BA interacts with everybody in the organization. A BA does not just sit with a business unit and interact with their business unit. They don't just sit with the development team and interact with developers and the Scrum Master all day. They interact with everyone in an organization at all levels of the company. So business analysts must analyze and synthesize information provided by a large number of people who interact with the business, such as customers, staff, IT professionals, and executives. The BA is responsible for eliciting the actual needs of stakeholders, not simply their expressed desires. So this goes back to that, really identifying the needs, the core requirements, the must-haves from the company, not just what they say they need or what they desire to have happen. But the BA has to really take all of that into account. In many cases, the BA also works to facilitate communication between organizational units. In particular, business analysts often play a central role in aligning the needs of business units with the capabilities delivered by IT and may serve as a translator between those groups. So this comes back to that whole concept of the BA really being that that liaison between IT or the development team and the business. So in my role, I meet with all levels of a company. So I will go in, I'll meet with the executive management, I'll run executive steering committee meetings when I come on. Usually I'm working with the C-suite level of a company, an organization, talking with a CTO, talking with their CMO, talking with their CFO, with their CEO. What do you really need? What are we doing with this project and what can we do to help you at your level? I also need to work with management, all layers of management, to understand what management needs. Typically that's some sort of reporting, or they need to make sure that things are organized. They need to make sure that work is flowing in a consistent manner across teams and different divisions of an organization. I go and I meet with people who, of course, will be the end users of the system. So sitting down with them and figuring out how they do their job, figuring out what they need. I like to ask them always when I'm especially interviewing people who will be the core users of a system, if you could have, especially if they have an existing system, if you could have anything, just think of anything, what would it be in the system that would help you? Don't think about the current system, don't think about, what we can do or can't do. Just give me like, if we could do 3 things to make your world easier, what would those be? Or what is something that, that you would envision? A lot of times those people at that key user level, which are usually, I don't want to say like the bottom of the organization, but the worker bees, the people out there actually doing the work, have some of the best ideas, and they don't always trickle back up through management, especially up to upper management. So really listening to them, and I try to get as many of those little things in as I can, because I value the importance of those things as much as I would someone at the C level telling me, okay, well, we have to have this report. That's just as important to me as somebody who's actually using the system, if not more, what they need and what would really help them. And then to be able to deliver that in a software product to the client and have those people really feel like their voice is heard is really satisfying. And one of the things that I love most about being a BA. So moving right along. So we'll move on to this question and answer here. Do we need BAs in Agile? And yes, we definitely do. The Agile Manifesto uses the term developers to describe the team who works on building the product. So developers is that entire team of people who are creating the software product, not just a software developer, engineer, coder, not the person coding it. The development team, and the term developer describes the team who work on building that product. That includes a BA. A BA is part of the development team. This is a cross-functional team of skilled individuals who bring a variety of expertise to bear on the process of building a software product. The skills that developers require to do this include business analysis, technical design, programming in various languages and tools, testing, UI design, technical writing, architecture, and whatever else is needed to produce working software. Working software is a product which in the production environment delivering value for our customers. So this is the Agile Manifesto. Agile Manifesto does not say, we don't need business analysis anymore, we just need a bunch of developers to go out and code this thing for us. Business analysis is a key part of that development team to create a valuable software product for our clients. Much like other approaches, business analysis is central to the success of an Agile project. Business analysis is necessary to enable a diverse group of customers to speak with a single voice. Not all Agile projects have the defined role of business analyst, but all Agile projects do business analysis. So if you don't have a business analyst on your team, your development team is still doing business analysis, whether you have a business analyst or not. That is a key function of creating software products, particularly with Agile teams. Agile business analysis is about ensuring the right information is available to the development team in the right level of detail at the right time so they can build the right product. So that BA is really about making sure that the developers, the people actually coding this, and that the team have the right level of detail at the right time to build the right product. I think that's really key to understanding that role, and it's a nuance. Not all BAs can do this, and not all people are fit to be a BA. This falls into that category of where people tend to say, okay, well, we've got a project manager, we're going to have them do BA work. Or we have this QA tester, we're gonna have them just do the BA work, right? Having the other roles step in to fill that role of business analysis. Not everyone can do that. It is a nuanced skill that not everyone can do. Not everyone can figure out both sides of it. So finding a good business analyst is key, and a business analyst who really understands your business, who understands your product, who understands your business needs and your goals and objectives for the entire team. So it's not a one BA fits all either. So many of you have probably seen this picture before, and it's one of my favorites. And I've seen it with, I just grabbed one with random captions on it, but it speaks a lot to the misunderstanding of a project. So here, if we look at the first diagram, it says, as the architect drew it, but we could look at this as the requirement was provided from the client, right? So the client says, okay, here's my requirement, I need you to go do this, right? Number two is how the epic or user story was written based off of that requirement that was probably sent an email or, you know, somehow just thrown over the wall from the business saying, okay, I need you to build this for me. So then an epic or user story was written for the team, and this is what was written. The third one is how management described what they needed. These are the, you know, this is the core compliance items that we must have in this, you know, to make this product work. Down here in the corner is how the designer envisioned it. The designer looked over this information and said, I know exactly how we can build it. It'll be beautiful. Look how symmetrical it is and amazing. The swing's not going anywhere, but it looks great. The next one is how the developers built it. They took all that information and said, okay, well, we need the swing going this way. We need to have a tree. We need to have some ropes. Well, I guess we're gonna have to find a way to lift the tree up, and we'll put it right here in the middle. That way the swing can at least swing, right? Because in the way the designers drew it, they couldn't swing. So they had to find a way to make that swing be able to go back and forth, right? So just cut out the middle of the tree and put up some sticks. And then at the end, that's what the customer actually wanted. They wanted a rope swing, or they wanted a tire swing tied up on a branch. So this is one of those ways to depict how different people, how a requirement can move through, and different people can see it in different ways. If you don't have somebody using the same voice and really doing the asking all of the questions, refining the requirement, asking people over and over, making sure that it really is what they want, oftentimes we'll end up what you get in this bottom middle picture, because that's what the information was provided. And it's kind of like that old game of telephone. Well, this person tells this person, and that person, and they document it, and that person looks at it and does a design, developer codes it, and it's tested and it's done. Met the requirement, right? But the BA's role is really getting in there and getting that clarification, asking questions, asking the questions again, ask them again. Make sure that that clarity is there and that we're providing what our customer is actually wanting. And sometimes they don't know what they want. More often than not, they don't know what they want, and they need that BA to come in and say, well, do you want a tire swing? Do you want a tiered swing? Do you want a hanging rope? How do you really want this? And help them get to that bottom vision, and then help the rest of the team see how to get there. All right. Any questions so far? I can open up to questions right now if anyone has any, like, anything. All right. There'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. But.
Celestia?
Yes.
So the work needs to be done, and if they don't have a BA on the team, who's doing it, or what is the downfall? It doesn't get done well.
Right. There's ambiguity. Yeah, there's ambiguity. Yeah, there's ambiguity. There's a lot of churn. There are a lot of bugs and defects found because that level of clarity isn't there to go back. And if the BA can get that level of clarity, and that is fed directly to the developers, and they've done their due diligence and they've done what they need to do to clarify, make sure that the business knows what they want, it's effectively documented, and that is sent to a developer. The business analyst's role is to remove roadblocks so that the developers can sit down and code, so that they can just work on the coding and creating the product. And they're not spending their time churning and going back and forth and asking question after question after question. It's okay to ask questions because you need clarity, but if the BA has done a good job at defining all of this, figuring all of this out up front, and then giving that to the developers, really the developers just need to look at their backlog every day, take the item, open up their user story. They have all the information that they need in there to go and code it. And so it takes out all of these extra steps, all these extra meetings, all of these the unknowns that are going back and forth, and then the developer trying to find the right person who can answer the needs, or the QA team getting all of these, all of these tickets and then going through and testing them and thinking, this doesn't seem to work the way you thought it would. And it's the ambiguity and the lack of clarity on a project from not having a BA. It doesn't mean that teams don't do it. Teams do it all the time, but having a good BA on a project just streamlines the whole process, removes all those roadblocks, and lets the developers do their job. Yes.
This is related because you and I work together. Of the projects you've been on in the past 10 years, what percentage of those have you been a dedicated BA as opposed to the ones that we worked on where you were partial UX, design, BA, blah, 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 all these questions? Right?
Yeah.
So what's the industry gravitating towards as far as building that BA into a creative role or UX role or something else?
It's a great question, Jason. Thank you. So BAs were a big part of waterfall development back in the day, right? That was the development methodology prior. And Agile came along, and when Agile came along, there was this misconception that we didn't need BAs anymore. And so BAs were kind of scrambling to figure out, well, what do we do? What do we call ourselves? How do we continue to help affect change and streamline processes for development? So we kind of like figured that everybody in the industry kind of had a little bit of a shakeup. So the UX field evolved out of that shakeup. And so there's a book called The Key Elements of User Experience. It was written early on in the early 2000s to really talk about the field of user experience. And I may misquote this, but I believe there's like 9 key tenets of user experience, what user experience is and does. A BA does 7 of those 9 things, right? So when you think of that, if you think of you have a field doing 9 things and you have another field and they're doing 7 of those 9 things, there's a lot of overlap. A project with a good UX, if they have the skill, those required skills of a BA, and not all UX people have all 9 either, but it's just the whole field has, there's the key tenets of user experience. If you have a good UX person who has those key BA skills, then you likely don't need a BA on that project. If you have a UX person on a team who is more just design focused, who really is a designer, and they're just in the role of UX, then you would want a BA in that role. But there is a lot of ambiguity between those two. And I'm part of the UX practice here at STG too, because I still do, even as a BA, a lot of what I'm doing is still part of the tenets of user experience. The two are really, they go hand in hand. So that's a great question. Another common one that comes up. Yeah.
I think it's really it's more about the skill set
Mm-hmm.
of the title.
Yeah.
These days. So
right.
Whatever, if you're right with the skill set to do whatever the job needs doing.
Yep. That's great. Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, it's always important when you're bringing a BA onto a team to really understand what kind of a BA you're getting. Because there are a lot of different types of BAs, and BAs have a lot of different skill sets. They have a lot of different names. There's a technical analyst, there's a business analyst, there's a systems analyst, there's an architect analyst, a BA architect analyst, there's just a standard of business user and business analyst who really just understands the business side. They don't really understand technology. There's technical BAs and there's non-technical BAs. So an Agile BA is what I'm talking about here. An Agile BA is a part of the software development team. So they are a technical business analyst. They really understand technology, they understand software, and they also understand the business needs, right? So when you do bring on a BA and you're looking at bringing on BAs to your teams, be clear on what you need that BA to do, because BAs have different skill sets and they're not all the same. So, and that's the same with anything. It's like if you're going to bring a developer onto a team, you don't say, okay, well, I'm going to find a developer. Okay, I found a developer, let's bring him onto the team. Well, he might be a Java developer and you're running a .NET project. Those are two very different things. You need to make sure you find the one with the right skill. Are they both software developers? Are they both software engineers? Yes, but they have very different skill sets. So again, you have to look at the type of person you're looking to bring on and the need that you're needing them to fill. Great questions, thank you. All right, so there is a great article by a man named Tazeen Shaikhi. And the article is called Business Analysis in an Agile World. So most of the rest of my presentation is going through this article that he wrote. And I did a bunch of research and I found all this information and I tried to pull it together for this presentation. I had my slides blocked out. And one of the last articles I found was this article. And it summed up most of everything else. I think this person did the same research that I did, read the same articles, he had the same references and everything in there. So, but he did an excellent job at really refining this topic of what are the skills of an Agile BA? What does a BA do in the Agile world? So a lot of this is taken from that. I do have references at the end to quote, but that's where I got some of this information from. But he did a great job of summarizing this. So some of the key skills that he outlines of a BA on an Agile project is continuously evolving clarity, holding the context in a consistent manner, building trusted teams, and gauging documentation needs. So those are some of the things that you probably noticed were in my agenda. This isn't the first time you've heard them. It's not going to be the last time you hear them either. So let's go into each of these items in a little bit more detail. So continuously evolving clarity. When a software project begins, its discovery phase is the responsibility of the business analyst to constantly evolve clarity around the business value and benefits to be delivered. So it's something that the BA really needs to look at, especially at the beginning of a project. The business value and benefits to be delivered. What are we trying to do and what is the value to the business that we're trying to provide with this project? The BA elicits must-have requirements, breaks them down into user stories. They continually ensure that the requirements of those epics and user stories are ensuring the business benefits. So when we define that business value, we're making sure that we're constantly evolving those requirements. So we're constantly going back and refining those and reiterating the business value to create that clarity. And then also evolving the clarity between the stakeholders of the project, and that's all the stakeholders. And that goes back to providing that clarity to, again, the business side of things, so that the business understands and has that clarity of purpose, and that the development team has that understanding as well of those business needs. So in continuously evolving clarity, how do we do that? So there's a couple different ways that are provided, that are outlined in this article, that talk about how we continuously evolve clarity. The first one is by preparing a skeleton flow. Really what this is in the beginning of a project, a BA goes in and they find the pain points. They find the bottlenecks. They figure out where there are issues in the current process or in the current system and try to figure out how to eliminate those. Making sure that the users are comfortable stating their user interface needs. And noting that the business users typically think in a visual way. They're thinking of what they're interacting visually. They're not always thinking, okay, well, I need to be able to click here and I need to be able to complete this function and this requirement. They're thinking of it visually. So as the BA, when you're meeting with the end users, you really need to understand where those users are coming from. And when they're conveying requirements, you need to be thinking of that in a visual term. So preparing the skeleton flow up front helps the customer create a tangible picture of what features are needed by them in the software. So the skeleton flow, you can think of it, I put in parentheses here, architecture. This is kind of coming up with that architecture of, okay, what's really key in this project? What do we really need? Next, we go into rapid prototyping. Once we figured out that skeleton flow, figured out the pain points, figured out the key features of a system, then we can start creating prototypes, which include, whether that's a wireframe, a fully functional prototype. A technical BA, an Agile BA, needs to at least be able to create wireframes. You need to be able to at least create a screen. Doesn't have to be a high fidelity, beautiful picture, but you need to, whether it's on a pen and paper, or Visio or Axure or whatever tool you want to use. Find a way to get those requirements and make them visual so that you can review them with the customer and help pin down those requirements. The development team and customer both start getting a feel of what's needed. Rapid prototyping is a vital technique to evolve clarity. When you start getting pictures out there and you're looking at the pictures, you start being able to find even more pain points. You begin to find more unknowns. Well, okay, if we have this page and we have this page, or if we have this screen, where is this information going to come from? Or who is going to enter this information? How are we going to get here? A lot more questions start surfacing when you have a picture that you're speaking to. And then the third item in here is actively collaborating with the customer to share constantly. So this just gets back to figuring out what's known and what is unknown. So again, finding that ambiguity and defining unclear scenarios and adding those into the product backlog with the requirements that you originally found. There's the key requirements that you get at the beginning, and then you keep adding to that backlog. You keep adding requirements. As those unknowns are found, you write those up as a user story just like you would something else. And also determine if it can be parked or if it should go in the backlog, and find their priorities. So when you find these unknowns, they need to go through the same refinement process as any other requirements or user stories that have been written up. And sometimes they don't need to be written up. Sometimes nothing needs to be done, or maybe it's a future enhancement. You don't need to worry about it, but at least you've identified those unknowns. And again, you're clearing that path, you're getting rid of that ambiguity so that the requirements that are provided to the developers are clear and concise at the end of the day. Yes.
Understanding that I absolutely agree and fully support skeleton flows. Seriously support it. The argument can be made that implies waterfall, not agile. So how do you employ that in Agile when it really relates more to a waterfall approach?
It's a good question, Claire. So another misconception with Agile is that we don't do any discovery or planning for Agile projects. And that is a false statement. So you led me right into that one. Thanks, Claire. Yeah, in Agile projects, we definitely you still have to do discovery and planning. You have to identify a lot of these things. Often, especially projects that I'm on as a BA architect, I'm brought on at the beginning of a project. I'll be on a project for, say, 4 to 6 weeks before the development team even comes on, and to do this type of stuff, because these things need to be figured out. You can bring developers on, but until you kind of figure out this stuff, they're not going to have work, and you're just wasting resources, time, and money. So there is still a level of discovery and planning that need to go into each project. Figuring out this stuff at a high level, sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's 6 weeks. That phase varies, how much time is needed, and also in the size of the project. Some projects are a lot bigger than others, right? But the BA at least needs to get in there in the beginning, figure out what is needed, get those high-level requirements figured out. You don't need high-level prototypes. You might not even have wireframes at that point, at the time that you bring the team on. But you have at least identified enough requirements, refined them enough to get them into user stories, created a backlog. Until you have a backlog, there's no point of bringing on developers onto a team, because that's what developers work off of, as a backlog. So that time varies, but it's still definitely needed in Agile projects. And a lot of people don't add that into their plans and their budgets. Yes?
Hi, my name is Anthony.
Hi, Anthony.
I guess that kind of gives you a good baseline to get started, but that's always a living and breathing document that can evolve. So as the Agile team evolves and learns from their mistakes, or can kind of refine those plans that they envisioned early on, it just becomes part of their sprint cycles, where they're keeping that up to date and making changes as they move forward.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, find out as much as you can up front, document at a high level, and then as the project goes, then you get to that refinement period. And it's not just a BA doing all of this, and I know I make it sound that way probably when I speak, but the BA is constantly working with other people. They are facilitating, and they're listening. They're sitting in, Scrum every morning with the development team. They are attending all of the sprint planning sessions. They're attending the retrospectives. They're involved in every step of the way, and they're working with the developers to help refine all of this. Typically, a BA stays a couple sprints ahead of where the developers are. So 2 or 3 sprints before the developer is going to work on a user story, that BA is opening that user story that's been written, and that's when they're really diving in and getting to those detailed levels of requirements and really clarifying. Sometimes later in the backlog, once you've gotten pretty far into a project, you'll get to user stories and find, oh, we don't even need this anymore, and we're just going to throw this out. That happens, and that's okay. That's part of Agile, is being flexible enough to throw stuff out when it doesn't matter anymore, because what you thought you were going to build at the beginning of a project, what you end up building in the end, can be very different, right? And so Agile has to allow for that, that change that happens in between. All right. Holding the context in a consistent manner. So this wording was a little, I don't know, it's a little confusing to me, or a little, I don't know, vague, I guess, but really this is talking about finding the context of the system, keeping the business goals central and key, and in the forefront of the project as it's going, and being consistent. Consistency is very important. And I mentioned projects change throughout as you're moving. Consistency is still important even with Agile change, right? Projects change, but if something starts becoming inconsistent the further down you go, that's another part of the BA's role, is going back and making sure what we've already built is consistent with what we're continuing to build, and identify if we need to go back and maybe change some of the things that we had originally done because it is no longer consistent with where the project has gone. So in holding the context in a consistent manner, really this is talking about everybody getting on the same page, speaking the same language, making sure that the terminology the business is using, that the development team is familiar with that same terminology, creating a glossary, whether that be in a document somewhere, or if nothing else, that should be in the user story itself. In the repository, the user story should contain the business language that needs to be the domain language, as they call it, so that that can be consistent across the board. So the business might call someone a customer and the development team calls them a client. Well, sometimes that page is going to say enter client name, and then the customers, and then when I'm meeting with the business users, like, why does it say client name? Who's the client? We said customer, right? It's those little terminology things of really defining what the business calls something and making sure that the development team knows what those terms are and what that language is being used. And then doing a retrospective. And this is a little bit about what was just being referenced, is constantly at the end of each sprint or iteration, going at the team saying what worked well, what didn't work well, what can we change? And that constant evolution and change not only strengthens the project, but it strengthens the team. It strengthens trust in the team. Having the ability to be open and honest, talking about what didn't work well, and having a voice is really important. Now, that being said, I've been on projects where people did not use retrospectives as they were actually meant to be in Agile. In Agile, they're meant to be really being honest, not rude or cruel or calling people out, but doing it in a safe environment and creating that trust with a team. If people don't feel like their voice can be heard on the development team itself, as that team, you're going to run into a lot of conflicts. And so the retrospective is another way to build trust with a team. Say, hey, look, this last sprint, I've had this happen where they said that user story that you wrote didn't make sense, or you completely forgot a whole piece in that. Next time, make sure that you ask the client, ask the customer this, ask the business this. So just making sure, sometimes it's, okay, QA is taking way too long. How can we streamline this? It's identifying anything that the team is seeing, bringing it up in a safe environment, and then adjusting going forward. So by the time you've gone through several sprints, you've gone through several retrospectives, the team is working well. You've got a really high functioning team who has trust built, and then produces great software in the end. And that brings into the building empowered teams in a trusted environment. I just segued right through my next slide. But it is key to create a trusted environment, build empowered teams, learn how to listen. I love to talk. I'm really good at talking, I don't know. Maybe I'm not really good at it, but I do it a lot. Listening is really important, and that's one thing that as a BA, I really had to work on, was a skill of really listening, and not just listening to the business when they were telling me a requirement, when I'm sitting and eliciting requirements from people, but listening to the team, listening to the developers, listening to feedback, listening to what people have to say. That art of listening really helps strengthen a team. We have understanding of shared responsibilities, and we're all looking to achieve the right balance, right? We're all looking to create a great tool, a great system for our clients at the end of the day. And it's good to remind the team of that and remind ourselves. Again, or not again, but just moving along to gauging documentation needs. I commented on this a bit earlier, but it's important that the BA gauge just enough technology, and that's equally important to gauge just enough documentation, right? So we don't have to build, this kind of gets into that philosophy of an MVP, a minimum viable product. So in Agile, we can look and say, what are what's just enough technology that we can get to market, or that we can release this to our users, and And then how can we build on that and iterate from there? Maybe you don't go to market, maybe you don't push to production, but you can at least have that minimum viable product created. And so how do you determine what that is? How do you determine what is just enough technology? What is just enough software? That's a tricky skill and a whole other topic for another presentation. But that is one of the things that the BA and the dev team really has to identify and work with the business as well, and really understanding that. So there's a quote in here, and I'm like losing my place already. The traditional role of a business analyst was to document requirements in a well-articulated manner for the business and development team. Right, so it was the role, and this kind of goes back to waterfall days, and the traditional role of a BA was document and be well articulated. Make sure that you cover everything, because everything has to be in the documentation, because once the documentation's done, then it's done, and there's a stopgap. Then it's going to go to development, and then it's going to go to QA, and then it's going to go to release, and it will be another year or two before we get back to releasing any new features into a system in waterfall. So a BA really had to articulate those requirements well. So now with an Agile BA, good articulation is still key. But it's in the mode of representation that is key. In Agile, it's more vocal than on paper. So the BA needs to be well articulated with their words in meetings when they're eliciting requirements. They still need that well articulation, but that doesn't all have to go into the documentation. It doesn't need to be on paper, but they need to have that understanding, and they need to be able to ask the right questions at the right time and get the right level of clarity needed from the business, and make sure that the development team understands that as well. So that articulation is still key, but it's a vocal articulation versus all on paper. There are 4 key purposes of documentation within a software project: communicating what is to be developed, referencing and tracking key decisions taken, training, and regulatory compliances. There are different purposes for each of these, and there's a different time and place for each of them to be used. The BA should gauge why we're documenting and what that level of detail on the documentation is. The BA also should work with the development team to arrive at a correct, apt documentation methodology for the stakeholders and the developers. So as a development team early on, determining, I've been on projects where the developers really just want a user story and sometimes a wireframe, and they can go and take it from there if I'm working with a senior team. I've been on other teams where I have epics, but my user stories are really long and there's a lot of detail, and I'm putting preconditions and I'm putting post conditions and I'm putting in roles and security and all sorts of details and compliance information and business logic. And that detail, it's important in a project, especially for a BA, to determine with the development team that they're working with what level of documentation is needed on both ends. And that's for the development team. The business also wants documentation from a BA. As much as we like to say in Agile that everything's in the user story, it's all in Jira, just look in Jira, that's where all the requirements are. The business, and particularly executives and management, they still like documentation. So determining with the business what amount of documentation is sufficient for them. Can I write up a 2-page executive summary talking about each sprint? Can I just do an export of the backlog of the name of user stories, send that to you and tell you what's in there? Or do I need to actually provide a full business requirements document around all the requirements and functionality that we're building? That's up to the business, and it varies by project. Yeah.
Do you have any numbers as far as how much documentation affects the success of these projects? For example, truly agile group that doesn't fall agile. Mm-hmm. Slack, Skype, email, Jira, Google, phone, whatever. Mm-hmm. Text messages. So you mentioned as long as it's articulated vocally, right? Unfortunately, when you articulate something vocally to a creative, they usually forget it within 10 seconds. So what's the MVP, minimum viable product, that IIBA or whatever recommends for an Agile project to be successful?
It's a good question. If there was one golden answer, that would be great. But it varies on the project, and it varies on the people who you're dealing with. So in Agile, the least amount of documentation is typically preferred, right? So in Agile, it shouldn't all be about the documentation. You don't need a 150-page BRD with all the specs and everything in there, but you do still need documentation. And people think, oh, well, it's Agile, we don't need documentation. It's true. If I'm having conversations and I know all of these requirements, right? I've had all these meetings, I've sat down with users, I've talked through it, I understand what they need. If I just go and write a user story where I write a user story statement as a blank, I need to blank so I can blank, right? I write that user story sentence and I put that in a user story and I go tell some developers to go do it. What happens to that 5 hours of vocal and email and Skype and meetings of information that I just spent to try to figure out the requirements for this? If I'm not sharing that somehow with the developer who's actually doing this, then all of that is pointless. So it's making sure that all of the details are in there that are needed for the developer, but not too much detail, right? I mean, you don't need to usually spoon feed a developer. Like, they know how to go, and I don't need to say, okay, so here's the JSON script, here's the data map, here's, you know, everything that you need to go and run this. But enough pertinent key information and making sure that the business needs are always met. I don't know, that's kind of a canned response, but that's all I've got for you. So there is not a golden, like, there's, you know, this percentage of projects need this amount of documentation. It depends, because each project is vastly different.
With just enough technology, we need just enough more articulated documentation.
Yeah.
That I don't think it can be all vocal. That doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
Because there's people understand things differently in their walk away. You have 5 people walking away with a slightly different understanding. There needs to be some type of well-articulated documentation, not just for this round of development, but in a year from now, when they're going to rework something, they can see, well, where do we start? Where's the basis of this? And so I think there needs to be enough articulated documentation, not just written.
Definitely.
So not too much to be understood.
So one thing that we do at our company, we're definitely not experts at Agile for sure, but we do kind of a functional spec, right, for the stakeholders, given that detail they need, and that, as you said, varies from who is the stakeholder who's asking for, right? And we also do a second set of specifications. We call them technical specs, call them whatever you want. It's documentation for the developer. And so a project that we're doing right now, it is 100 pages, but it's a 6-month project. Whereas, you know, it leaves out a lot of you know, kind of the liberations that the developer wants, but it does include, we found when it's really successful, a ton of pictures. And not pictures as in wireframes, what does it look like, but pictures of the meetings that we were in, right, where things were decided, we take a picture of the whiteboard and include that in our documentation, because that reminds people of the conversations. And then we'll put, like, this key decision was made, this key decision was made. A lot of times that's why they're so long, is just because the picture's big. But we found that to be very successful. I don't know if it worked for anyone else, but it has for us.
That's great, thanks. Yeah. Okay, we are running low on time. So this is a diagram in the article we just talked about. So this just goes through and reiterates all the things that we just, those previous slides. So it talks about evolving clarity as the outcome and the outputs that are required for that. Holding context continuously, building empowered teams in trusted environments, engaging documentation needs, and then those outputs for each. And I'll make sure these slides get shared with everyone as well. So STG BAs, and I've kind of touched on this a bit and talked about it. So at STG, as I mentioned, I manage the BA team here. So we only bring on senior BAs because we're a consulting firm. We don't have the luxury of, I don't sit and have my team of 18 BAs sitting right there with me where I can train them and do cross-training and help build their skills. I do a lot of mentoring. I do a lot of help and trainings and things like that with my team, but we're not sitting locally together each day. So we only hire senior BAs at STG because to have a consultant who's going into a company in that BA role, typically they're in that more senior BA architecture role. So when we bring BAs on at STG, we typically bring on someone who's senior. That being said, we have other projects where they already have an established large BA team, and they just need a BA to come in and fill a certain role. So in those cases, we'll bring on a mid-level BA. Someone who is not super senior but has the right skill set. So again, it comes down to that finding the right skill set for the project that we need. So that varies based off of projects and our clients that we have. But we try to typically bring on more senior BAs, and then depending on if the client needs, we have some mid-level as well. But we don't have the luxury of bringing on junior BAs because we don't have the luxury of training them on the job. So yes, Chris.
You mentioned this, but we oftentimes run across great junior level BAs. Many times they are great direct hire fits. If you say you want to bring a junior level, we are a source for that.
Right.
They just typically don't fit in our consulting model unless they're very senior.
Thanks. That's a good point. Yes, we do contract to hire as well. So we'll do the staffing placement for you. We'll find somebody that's a right fit for your company, and we'll be able to place them as well. So everyone who's brought on to STG, we do what we call a tech review. That's an interview that I do for all BAs who are brought in, and talk to them for an hour on the phone and figure out what they know, how much they know, the depth of their knowledge, and if we think they'd be a good fit for STG. And all our practices do that. I just do the ones for the BAs. All of our BAs that we bring on have experience in Agile software development projects. That is one key thing that we do require from BAs who we bring on to our staff, at least as consultants, is that they must have been on a BA project for at least a couple of years and really understand Agile well. All our BAs are CSMs, they're certified Scrum Masters. If we bring someone on and they don't already have a CSM, then STG pays for them to go and take the course and certification so that we can say that they are all certified Scrum Masters. Our BAs don't typically work in the exact role of a Scrum Master, but having that certification helps them really understand the roles and processes of a software team. We have continual learning. We have CDPs, career development plans that our consultants all have just to continue their growth and relevance, reading articles, attending webinars, meetups, things like that. And we adapt, our BAs adapt to different industries. They're comfortable ramping up in different industries. And the key goal is understanding the business needs and translating them to the development team. So if you're in financial software or medical software, the role of the BA really is still to go in there, understand those business needs, and translate them to the developers. So our BAs, again, it gets to that. We try to bring on more senior people, have proven skills in being able to, jump into a new industry, learn it, and get effective requirements out of it. So in all, we provide clarity, continuity, and the right amount of documentation to empower your teams. So I won't bore you with going over my summary because we are out of time, but there we go. So let's move on. Can we move to questions? No, we can't move to questions. We can't move to questions.
Oh, the question slide here, Claire, come on.
There we go. Questions. Okay, Claire. All right.
Where does it be fit? Where's the BA come in relative to cost? Remember, scope change, management, whatever. Is that something you just know and then pass on to the PM or management? Do you deal with cost at all?
Cost of the project or
scope creeping or enhancements? If something you just noticed and you just go to the PM and say, yo.
So BAs don't deal with cost or resource management. That's a project management role. So project managers deal with cost and risk and resource management. Often a BA will overlap in a PM role, and in that case, then they would fill that function. If a BA is noticing something with cost, then they would bring that to the project manager, but really BAs typically don't deal with the financial piece of things. That's a project management function.
Yes. we've all seen BAs be very, very successful, and some clients haven't had a chance to use them yet, and so they look at it as just, oh, that's an expense. How do BAs show the ROI? Once someone's done it, they're like, wow, we saved so much money. But what's best practices for showing the ROI of why you should bring a BA in?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of teams don't understand the benefit of a BA, especially if they haven't had a BA on their projects yet. I don't have any statistics. I could make something up like it's going to be 200 times better if you bring a BA on and you're going to deliver faster and quicker. I can say that I personally have never been on a project where they were like, we made a mistake bringing on a BA. I have never heard a client say we shouldn't have brought a BA on once they brought a BA. I hear quite the opposite. I don't know how we would have done this if we wouldn't have brought on a BA. And then projects who haven't had a BA and seeing the delays in the project, the churn, the ambiguity, the quality of the product delivered, there is a big difference. I'm sure there are stats out there. There's probably some on the IIBA website or out there. I'm sure there's some information. I don't have any of those numbers in front of me right now though. So yeah, but it's a good point. I know I'm a BA, so I'm not just saying it because I'm a BA, but it is definitely very helpful. I have front-end developers come to me all the time like, oh, I was just on a project without a BA. I have no idea why the client doesn't understand why there's not a BA on this project. So yeah, I hear that quite often. All right, well, we are at 1 o'clock, so we do want to make sure that we don't keep you longer than needed. But I will be around, so if you have any other questions, please come up and talk to me. You can email me. My email address is here, my cell if you want to text me, or reach out to an account manager at STG, and we can help you out. So thank you very much.